I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
Today's Ask Altucher is about a topic near and dear to my heart and the hearts of pretty much everybody, which is money, particularly the history of money. Why is it important to know the history of money? Because when you understand the history of money, not only over the past 50 or 100 years, but over the past 10,000 years, you really understand the points when money has enough problems with the current form of money that it needs to evolve into something else. The way bartering, evolved into coins, evolved into paper money backed by metal, evolved into paper, and maybe the next evolution might be crypto. And there's all the little mini evolutions in between. And this helps inform you of like what's happening in the economy now in terms of having some understanding of what inflation is, deflation, and so on. So this is part one of the history of money. Part two is going to be more crypto focused and maybe what the future of money might look like. But I'm joined by Omid Malekan. He's been on this podcast many times before. He was the top guy at Citigroup for all things crypto. He's written a book, Re-Architecting Trust, about money and crypto. Such a smart guy. A pleasure to talk to him about the history of money. And here we go.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
So today, Ask Altucher Show, I brought Omid, basically someone in the Ask Altucher. They're like, hey, you guys should talk about the origin of cash and then lead into crypto.
Well, okay. It's a very interesting topic. Then Omid Malekan's been on the podcast many times, most recently discuss his latest book, Re-Architecting Trust, which basically is like a history of money and a history of Bitcoin. You were also really involved with Citigroup's Bitcoin decisions for a long time, and you recently retired from there. But it's a very interesting thing going all the way back because money predates recorded history. In fact, probably the first recorded history are people keeping track of IOUs in the marketplace. So they would be like sticks where you would make notches for every time Omid bought, an apple from me. I would make another notch on the stick for Omid. And that was the origins of basic accounting. And some of those sticks are 30,000 years old.
There's also a theory that counting was originally invented for commercial transactions.
I believe it, because why else would you need to count?
Right. So there are two theories on the origins of money. The more popular one is the barter theory, which was actually really popularized by Adam Smith. But the idea there was before there was money, we had barter societies. Barter societies were highly, highly inefficient. So people invented money because it was easier to trade your wheat for money and then use that money for labor down the line than to actually price everything and everything else. The other theory of money is the credit theory. And that theory, which I think is more credible, pun intended, is that barter never existed because it just would have been a nightmare. Instead, people just did favors for each other. And it was like, I'll give you some wheat today, and then next week you'll help me with something, and we'll call it even. And that money was invented as a way to settle these favors occasionally.
Well, let me ask you, as societies grew, so let's say 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, we started, having societies that were bigger than tribes. Maybe it was even longer ago than that. So suddenly you had to deal with people you didn't know.
Mm.
Maybe if two tribes came together in a marketplace and each tribe was 150 people, suddenly you have to have a little more trust involved. And if it's just 15 people living in a cave, okay, you owe me next week and I'll kill you or whatever if you don't, do it. But when the society got a little better, you needed a way to an account for things and a way to maybe transact right then and there.
Yes, and actually, the anthropologists, they really believe in the credit theory because they've also observed this in more primitive societies in modern times. And basically, that's the idea that within the tribe, there are many forces, social, cultural, or the threat of violence, where people sort of live up to their debts and their favors. But across tribes, there isn't. You don't want to trust each other. Now, alternatively, across time, like even within the same tribe, if someone does you a favor and you're like, oh, I don't know if this person's going to remember that they owe me a favor 10 years from now. That's when I would want to cash it in. If you just exchange it for money, then it becomes permanent.
But then there's the question, was barter something that was very broad and general? So, for instance, if I made axes and you made grains, would I trade axes for grains, or would we barter in the sense that, okay, we're both going to trade our objects for some common thing, like, I don't know, animal skins or seashells or whatever, and then we're able to transact with this more common. We barter for those seashells, and then we're able to transact in seashells. Because I would think, really, the invention of money was an enormous increase in productivity. Because let's say I have an axe, I make axes. That's all I do. I've got to find someone who's going to use that axe. So it means I have to specifically find like a hunter or someone who chops down trees or whatever people used axes for back then. And that would make it much slower to make a transaction because first I have to find someone to take my axes and then go down the chain of bartering until I could finally get someone who sells me food or whatever.
Yeah. And again, I'm actually of the school of thought that that is so precarious that it never existed in the first place.
Right.
The other reason, which is problematic, is just pricing things would have been a nightmare. In a
Right.
world where there's no money, you have to price everything in terms of everything else, which just cognitively people can't do that. What in economic nerd speak is called the unit of account function of money, which is it just gives you a single thing to price all other things in, including labor. That in of itself is one reason why having money makes society a lot more productive.
So what do you think was the first money? I mean, there's various theories. Was it animal skins? Was it shells? When did they start making coins?
The origins of money is very interesting and diverse, and different things happen all over the world, but sometimes in parallel. But originally, yeah, people use what we call commodity money, which is anything that has some other value other than being the money. It could be grains, metals. Eventually, most societies in the East and the West settled on using metals just because they're more durable. It's easier in some ways to determine the quality of a hunk of gold than it is a bag full of grains. But then now we have a new problem, which is if you just use non standardized metals, gold, silver, copper, whatever, now we have a new source of inefficiency in the economy. It's like me and you are going to do a trade for that axe. And you're like, well, here's some silver. But I have a problem, which is one, I have to judge the quality of your silver. Is it pure? Is it an alloy? I don't know if there's a full silver. There probably is. And then I also have to judge the quantity of your silver. Like I literally have to weigh it. This is where coins come into the picture, because with coins, we have standardized quantity and quality. So again, even more efficient money.
But how do you know, even when a government or a local, force is minting metal coins, how do you know for a given thing of silver there isn't like just a bunch of copper in the middle that you can't see?
You never know for sure unless you do your own tests. But the idea has always been that if you have some kind of a powerful figure like a sovereign, the emperor, the king, whoever, if they are the ones who have a monopoly on minting the coins, then you at least have more of an assurance of its reliability than it was if it was just a stranger doing it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very important topic, and this is related to Bitcoin later on, which is that a government lives or dies literally based on people's trust in their money. Like, and we'll get to this as well. The first paper currency was made by a kingdom in China around 600 BC, and it was paper money. It represented, I guess, some quantity of metal. I'm not really sure, but because it's paper, it's really worthless technically. And so, at the top of it, in the same place where we put "In God We Trust," they put, "If you counterfeit this, you will be beheaded." That was the first kind of like way to build instill trust in the money. Like, we will kill you if you damage the trust in this money.
Yeah, I believe it was the bark of the mulberry tree, and it was I think it was the Mongols under Genghis Khan.
Really?
Yeah, but paper money has also always existed as a receipt for metal money. That's how it came about in the West. That's why we call them banknotes, because you would go to the bank and they would have gold, and then they would give you a paper receipt to claim some of the gold, and then you could just use that as money. But the original idea that, one way to put it in modern technology terms is for money to be useful, it needs network effects. The more people are willing to accept any money, the more productivity everybody who uses that money has. So if you have a government issue the money and then have laws like what we call legal tender laws that say, hey, if you live in my kingdom, you have to use this money. And then also governments, a lot of times, they will borrow in their own money. They will pay salaries like of soldiers in their money, and they will collect taxes in their money. The whole idea being that we want to get to some kind of a society-wide standard, because then commerce is easier for everyone, with the big trade-off, of course, that now we're putting a lot of trust in the hand of the issuer of that currency.
Yuval Harari brings this up where he basically says that money is just a story that we believe in.
Yeah.
Because the paper dollar doesn't really have any value. It's a piece of paper. But if you believe in the value of that dollar, and let's say I live 5,000 miles away and I believe in the value of the dollar, those beliefs that we share are enough for us to trust each other in a transaction, which never would have occurred if there wasn't money, for instance. But getting back to money as gold or money as silver, it seems arbitrary that it was gold or silver. Like, how did it end up gold or silver? Because it seems like arbitrary because the richest country is going to be the one that has the most gold mines and silver mines in it.
It is somewhat arbitrary. And societies have also used different metals for money. And a lot of times it's actually had to do with what they had enough of, but not too much of, for the exact reason that you say. Because there have been instances in history where, like silver was predominant in Europe, but then once the New World was discovered and invaded and colonized, and there was a lot of silver, and it flooded the European economy with silver, then some people are like, well, let's switch to gold. There have also been other times where you actually have a shortage. There's just not enough of whatever metal that you're using, so you can't make as many coins as the economy requires, and then you end up switching to a different metal. It's very varied, but for whatever reason, gold and silver in more recent centuries sort of like occupied whatever the sweet spot is. But even then, there's been controversy because silver is easier to mine and there's more of it than gold. So whether your money, even if it is pegged to a metal standard on silver versus gold, has been a very interesting political issue.
But like, you said earlier how bartering would occur when we would be able to trade objects that have value or some form of money exchange. The original money was like commodity money or something would have some other value other than as money. People always say gold is a real thing. It's a hard asset, but does it really have value other than as money? I mean, yes, there are industrial uses for gold, but actually the same industrial uses occur for silver, which is 2% of the value of gold. So there's not really that many uses for gold.
No, and to go back to the point that you've all made about like money just being a myth, in a way, you don't want it to have too much utility because that almost erodes the mythology. Like if we think of gold as this magic, shiny metal that's hard to get out of the ground and it is the thing that will preserve your wealth and like, you give it as dowry to marry your children or something, then it holds a special place in our imagination. But if we also think of gold as like, oh yeah, and also like, I can make cookware out of it, it somehow takes away from that. And this applies to many things, right? Like, why are diamonds valuable? Why are handmade Rolex automatic watches valuable? Like, there's almost negative correlation between the utility of something versus how much we as a society accept it as a good store of value.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main. That's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and or cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues to or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. Right now, we've talked about how some form of barter, not pure barter like we discussed earlier, but the idea of commodity money was originally, a kind of barter. And there was problems with that because one tribe might have a bunch of seashells and another tribe might have a bunch of animal skins, and you still have to do too many conversions, and everybody would have to trust everybody's own money. But when it all became kind of similar from country to country, it's either gold or silver or some other kind of metal, there's a little bit more. I can take Roman money, for instance, and exchange it for Persian money because at least it's all silver, so I can melt it down for roughly, equivalent. So problems are solved with each evolution of money. And those problems ideally make society more productive, make transactions faster, make transactions more and more global. So the fact that, Persia might have used silver and Greece might have used silver made it possible to do this international transactions even thousands of years ago. I mean, the problem with that is that if you have a lot of things to buy, or let's say your town was invaded and you have to move and you were a wealthy person, you had to carry a lot of gold around all the time, which kind of put a target on your back. Like that's a problem with purely, if we all just use metal as a currency still, we'd be in big trouble because Jeff Bezos wouldn't be able to move very far. He'd be sitting on like this mountain made out of gold. So obviously there's a problem. So whenever there's a problem, there's some sort of evolution. We evolved into paper money, but that seems very complicated because A, there are trust issues. B, who decides? Now you really need a strong central authority to decide what the paper money is worth and to enforce it for anybody who doesn't believe that the paper money is worth something. So I think they kept up this illusion that you could exchange the paper money for gold whenever you want or silver or whatever. But what's the evolution of the paper money?
So it started with that convenience point that you made, that people, particularly like if you're traveling to a different city or something to do business, you don't want to always be walking around with this heavy bag of gold or silver clinking in your pocket. So then what you do is you go and you store your metal money with a goldsmith or a bank or a money changer, and then they give you a receipt. Like that's where the paper initially comes in. It's like, all right, this gives you the right to get back your 10 coins whenever you want. And receipts are a lot more flexible because you can make it for 1 coin or 10 coins, and they're lighter and they're easier to hide in your clothes or something so you don't get robbed.
Right. So now I can go to the market and let's say you're selling apples. I could
Yeah.
say to you, hey, I want to buy an apple. Look, here's the receipt. You can now use it. We all know the money changer down the road. He's Jewish, so he's the Jewish looking guy. So I give you the receipt. That was a sort of paper money as a receipt.
No, it was. And that's what we call economic nerd speak again. That's representative money. It's not commodity money. So it's the value is the fact that it represents something else. And in this case, it represents the right to go and claim silver coins in Europe or copper coins in China. But eventually you could see a situation where if everybody trusts this, at some point, like no one's bothering to go collect the metal money unless they want to go, travel across the ocean or something. Because like, yeah, we all know the guy down the road, he's got the coins, and now all that circulates is the paper. But that poses an interesting dilemma for the goldsmith or the bank who's issued the paper, which is if almost nobody ever shows up to collect the metal commodity money that you're holding, do you have to hold all of it? What if you
Yeah.
just held 90% of it and the other 10% you invested it in a business enterprise or even loaned it out?
Yeah, that's interesting. So that's the beginning of like fractional banking, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah,
I would imagine also there were a lot more Madoffs back then.
possibly, but also we're talking about much more primitive societies. And a lot of times, the primary money changer or bank or goldsmith was like a very trusted, reputable family. Like this is where the Medicis come from. And it's, again, social mores and pressures and the threat of violence being what it is. Maybe actually in a small city with like 50,000 people where there's one family that's trusted as the family that holds the metal and issues the paper money, maybe they're less likely to turn out to be fraudulent than a Madoff type figure.
That's a good point, because it's not like people could escape to Switzerland or some island. Everybody pretty much stayed in the city that they were born in because it was unsafe to wander, afar by yourself. And so in order for a family like, let's say, the Medicis or whatever families came before them to retain status, they have to be trusted because they have to stay in town. The only way they could be fully trusted is if they make sure, probably through their own use of military force, that their currency is that their receipts are trusted.
Right. The two go hand in hand. And of course, there are still governments, and governments have been creating rules around banking and money forever. But at the end of the day, because this is all just mythology, there is something fragile, somewhat precarious about it. And I think the simplest evidence of that is there have been thousands, probably, of different currencies throughout the ages that have at some point had some significant level of adoption in their local region, and none of them survive to this day. So that means something.
What does it mean?
It means that money is precarious and that mythology is something that can grow, but it can also shrink. And one of the ideas that I try to explore in the book is the more it grows, the more likely that whoever stands behind it ends up betraying it. And some people would even argue that we're witnessing the US and the dollar's version of that today, in the sense that our currency is now the global standard and the global reserve currency. But we've used that as an opportunity to print a lot of it, which some people are not happy about. We've increasingly also weaponized it with things like sanctions, like we enforced on Russia. And there's a long history of this, of like some emperor's coin becomes so powerful and so universally accepted that that emperor starts doing nefarious things with it, or even just like diluting the value of it, inflating it just because they think they can get away with it. And that leads to the demise of the myth and the currency.
Well, for a long time, I mean, forever basically, until very recently, all paper currency, it seems, was backed by some commodity like gold or silver. So I guess at some point they switched from viewing receipts as money to actually a local force, whether it's a bank or a government or whatever, issuing real money with pictures on it and a 1 or a 10 or a 20 on it to represent how much it signifies, and it becomes standardized throughout that society. And then we saw in I guess it was 1971. I mean, so there's a problem with this though, which is that what if your country doesn't have any gold or silver? You can't make money that represents that gold or silver. Like, you have to start invading other countries with gold or silver, or go to the new land, North America, where there's more gold and silver. So you have to find this metal. But what if your economy is growing faster than your supply of the metal that is backing your currency? And so this was sort of happening in the United States in the 60s. The economy was growing, but also we were spending an enormous amount of money on Vietnam and LBJ's, Great Society programs, which included, welfare and student loans and all these things. And so Nixon finally said, look, we're not going to keep digging gold just to like match our need for money. You're going to just have to trust purely the dollar.
Yeah, so the metal backing of money, one way to think about it is that it becomes a constraint on anybody abusing the mythology behind it. So like if your currency is backed by gold, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're like issuing gold coins. Even if you say, look, see that big fancy building with the columns over there? That's the central bank. And inside there, there's a lot of gold. And if you really wanted to, you could take your government issued paper money over there and get some gold for it. So don't worry about it. We're not going to abuse it. We're not going to inflate it. We can't print too much of the paper money because there's only so much gold. But as you said, that comes with its own constraints and problems. A lot of times, the most common has been things like war, where the government needs to print or borrow a lot more than it ordinarily does, and it just doesn't have the gold. There are other problems with the a metal standard or a gold standard, somewhat less nefarious. And one of them is that it gives the issuer of the currency less control over the money supply and the credit cycle.
Well, let me ask you, what happened in Germany in the 20s when suddenly, you know, it took 1 trillion marks to buy a loaf of bread? Like, were German marks backed by gold? I don't even know.
I actually don't know. I have not studied that period closely. I mean, but the things that we do know that in the aftermath of World War One, the devastation that they suffered, plus the reparations that they had to pay to the Allies, and I think they had to pay those reparations in the currency of the Allies.
Right.
So the German economy was almost like constantly exporting capital to its neighbors, which then crippled its domestic economy and the currency.
So one key thing which can cause hyperinflation, which is what everybody's worried about in the US, but this is not a problem we have. One problem many countries have is what Germany had in the 1920s, what most countries in South America had in the 1980s, and on, what Zimbabwe had in whenever that was, the 1990s, is that if you borrow money in another country's currency, you risk hyperinflation if you can't pay that money back because you have to print more of your own currency to convert into dollars, for instance, to pay the money back. And it's just a death spiral. You end up printing trillions of marks in the case of Germany. Whereas the US doesn't have that problem. That's one key thing that helps us avoid hyperinflation. And that's why people are concerned if suddenly everybody starts transacting for oil in something other than the dollar, it could mean we might not be able to A, lend as many dollars to people, and B, we might owe money in currencies, not the dollar, if we're buying oil, which we do.
Yeah, and I think hyperinflation is actually the wrong thing to be concerned about because hyperinflation is fairly rare. I think the bigger problem is if you just have a sustained period of elevated inflation, as we did here in the US in the 70s and part of the 80s, that in of itself could be very devastating. That to me is a more reasonable concern about what could happen to the dollar. But it's not just the dollar. We are in this very unusual time in history where virtually all of the world's money is only backed by a promise by a government. So it's fiat money. There is almost no currency that's backed really significantly by any kind of commodity like gold or silver.
Right.
And some countries have currencies that are pegged to other currencies, but we can talk about this when we get into crypto. But I always think it's ironic when you hear economists and other experts say, "Oh well, Bitcoin can't be money." Because money is something that's issued by a sovereign and there's a central bank behind it and they adjust interest rates. But that's only been money for like 0.01% of the time that money's been a thing. The history of money has always been changing.
Even in the US, I mean, in the 1800s, local banks would issue their own currency. So if you were in Montana, you could get like literally a $3 bill from the bank in Montana. And it was good because that bank was supporting it. It's not like in 1830, people would go from Montana to Chicago to buy a coat. You would have to buy everything in your local town and you would use the local currency. So it's kind of only a recent thing that all money now is issued by governments.
Yes. Not only that, but we're coming out of a period after COVID where all governments significantly increase the supply of their money at the same time. So it's not surprising then that we're going through a global period of high inflation.
Just out of curiosity, like on the subject, and there's a lot of different directions to go on the subject of inflation, but if the price of eggs inflates and many other things like that, the big problem really is wages have to keep up with it. If wages kept up with it, no problem. But why aren't right now wages keeping up with just everyday inflation?
Some wages are very sticky. So if you think about people who have contracts for what they make,
Mhm.
employers are generally hesitant. They don't just give raises for the sake of giving raises. There has to be some kind of a market dynamic that forces them to. Then there's the issue of automation and technology and innovation. Plus, frankly, like, people are sometimes hesitant to ask for more. Things are starting to pick up, aren't they? I don't follow the macro data that closely, but
Yeah, and inflation supposedly has been going considerably down pretty quickly right now. Maybe because of the rate hikes, maybe because the stock market's gone down and so many people are invested in the stock market, maybe just because of fear of a recession coming. But it seems like one of those things where, and this is a big debate, but and a different debate, but whether the Federal Reserve knows what they're doing, or whether market
no
forces can.
comment.
Yeah, whether the market for well, that's the whole thing with the Bitcoin is that there's no central authority that decides the value of the dollars that are in your pocket. But I remember I had a Federal Reserve deputy governor on the podcast early in the pandemic, and he said the main worry the Federal Reserve had then was deflation because
Yeah.
there was so much demand for the dollar around the world because the dollar was safe and is still the safest currency that they couldn't even inflate the dollar. And inflation is not necessarily bad if your economy is growing. I mean, look, the dollar has quote unquote lost 97% of its value in the past 100 years. Like what used to be a dollar in 1913 is now worth 3 cents now in terms of what it can buy. But at the same time, it's the biggest period of growth and innovation in world history. I mean, we've put a man on the moon, we've created the internet, we've practically curing cancer in the next few years. So inflation hasn't necessarily been a bad thing. It's healthy when people feel the growth in their country.
Yeah, I think the only things we can say that are absolutes is hyperinflation is bad and extreme deflation is bad. Those, I think, are universally acknowledged as being scenarios to avoid.
A
Everything,
deflation when it's not accompanied by product increases in
right?
productivity.
Like monetary deflation. Yeah,
When you get more in a phone this year than you got 10 years ago, like more apps and more speed and so on, the phone in a sense has deflated. Like the
right.
price, if you're paying the same price, but you're getting so much more, that's kind of a deflation in the currency. But it's not like the deflation experienced, for instance, in the Depression, where people just hid their money in a mattress and were afraid to use it. So that resulted in deflation.
Right. Yeah. If people become convinced that the value of money is only going to go up, then they don't want to spend it. They want to hoard it, which then diminishes economic activity.
Which could be what's happening now. When interest rates go up, it means the demand for the dollar will go up, which means you don't want to spend your dollar for other things because you're getting a higher interest rate in your savings account.
That's the hope of the Fed. But the politics of this is also very interesting because there are always winners and losers. So there's certainly people who really benefit from high inflation, like debtors, for example. They get to repay their debt with diminished value. But then there are people who really lose with it, which are people who don't have a lot of debt, but earn some kind of a wage where it's going to be difficult for them to raise prices. And this is for anyone who's a student of history, the back and forth on this is always been very interesting and played a big part in U.S. politics. You probably know James, the famous I think was it William Jennings Bryan speech, the Cross
Yeah.
of Gold speech, which is considered one of the greatest political speeches in American history. He was making an argument against the gold standard. He actually wanted a bimetallic or a more silver-oriented standard because it's more inflationary. And at the time, you had people who were farmers who were like, look, we got mortgages, we got a lot of debt, and our crop prices are too low. Like, we need some inflation to economically right ourselves.
Right. And there was practically no inflation back then in the 1800s, like almost zero. And having a gold standard or silver standard to some extent, like you said earlier, controls inflation a little bit and doesn't allow the government to control inflation, which with pure paper money that's not backed by anything, the government pretty much controls everything. And that's a big problem, which again, there was an evolution of money, and we'll talk about Bitcoin in a bit. But It's interesting just the story of money though, like or what you refer to as the mythology of money. Like it's so hard. Like you have to really be a mass hypnotist to convince people that this little piece of paper is worth one entire dollar. Like if you really look at the US dollar, there's this beautiful calligraphy and design. So okay, maybe you'll trust that. If you don't trust that, it's in God we trust. So if you don't trust the United States of America is on the top. But if you don't trust the United States of America, maybe you trust God because it's in God we trust. And then you have not only God, but look, the kind of the God of America is George Washington. Like he's the first president. He was the most supposedly the most honest president. So maybe you trust George Washington. His picture's right here. He backs this dollar. And then if you don't trust that, it's like a contract. There's the signature of the treasurer of the United States and the secretary of treasury. And then there's this number like A87426024A. Like, why do we need to have that number? But it kind of signifies that this was really printed in the United States. And if you don't trust that, the words, this certificate is legal tender for all debts, public and private. And then there's Washington, D.C., and there's a seal on it with an eagle. And then you turn it over. If you don't believe any of that, maybe you believe in this, a pyramid with a floating eye above it. Like this is ancient history. And there's like Latin or some other language written there. This is like, it's not just us, the people in Washington, D.C., it's ancient history. It's 5,000 years old, these pyramids. Like maybe you trust that. And on. Like it doesn't stop the ways in which, the mythology of the dollar is written all over the dollar.
And we can also see this in our personal lives. Like in Sapiens, Yuval Harari talks about like the other big myths, like religion being one of them. I think the three are language, religion, and money. But the funny thing is, like, there are plenty of people today that walk around and they're like, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in religion. And you're like, yeah, fine. You're like a perfectly sane person. But if somebody comes up and he's like, I just don't believe in money and I'm never going to use it, you'd be like, wow, you've completely lost your mind. You need help. It's
Right.
that pervasive of a myth.
Well, and the thing is, you get in real trouble if you counterfeit money. So again, just like the Medicis in Renaissance Italy, I mean, the US, you'll go to jail for a really long time if you counterfeit money.
I mean, you probably know the Secret Service was actually originally, its job was to do things like crack down on counterfeiting of money and dollars. It just so happened, I think the story, wasn't it that like their office was the closest to the White House? So when they decided the president should get additional protection, it would become something that they do too. But
Oh, I didn't know that.
their original purpose, I'll have to verify this, but I'm pretty sure the original purpose had to do with making sure that people are not counterfeiting money. Because if people counterfeit money, then it erodes the integrity of that money. And if the integrity erodes, then people stop using it and then it collapses in value.
This is such a valuable service for all business owners, big businesses, small businesses, doesn't matter. I wish I had this in the many different businesses that I've started. Sometimes it seems like your business is humming, but then suddenly you don't understand it. You're starting to fall behind. You're not understanding where your costs are, where your revenues are, where your payments are. Teams are buried in all sorts of like BS work, and you can't seem to close the books. So you need like one dashboard, one source of truth. I'm jealous of this business, NetSuite from Oracle, of course, NetSuite by Oracle. I wish I'd come up with this idea. It's a brilliant concept to have all your business intelligence on one dashboard. This is why you need to know these three numbers: 37,000, 25, and 1. So 37,000, that's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the number one cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all of your key performance indicators, your KPIs, in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, Get reliable forecasts and improve margins. Everything you need to grow all in one place. So right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/James. That's netsuite.com/James to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/James. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin, or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. I remember in the 90s, early 90s, there was this period, the area where the so-called Silicon Alley was created, where all these web design agencies sprung up. There was more print shops. Like, you needed a poster printed, you'd go to these print shops and they had these, the latest technology in copy machines. Now, $100 bills always had anti-counterfeiting features, and then it evolved to $20 bills. But these one group of guys, they were using their copy machines to literally print $1 and $5 bills and $10 bills, and just using them in local delis where nobody would question if they were counterfeit enough because they were so small. So counterfeiting has been like a big deal. Now it's all the way down to the dollar. I think there are anti-counterfeiting features of it.
Yeah, I just Googled it. So the Secret Service was, according to their own website, was founded in 1865 to stop counterfeiting, because that after the Civil War, a third of all currency in circulation in the U.S. was counterfeit.
That's crazy. I knew this one artist, JSG Boggs, who he was ingenious. He would paint dollar bills for himself, and they would always have something wrong. Like, maybe it would be like his picture on the $10 bill. So he would always do something where it was clear that it was not money. It was fake, but he was constantly being arrested by the Secret Service because he was painting money. Because here's what he would do. He would go to a restaurant, and at the end of the meal, they would give him the bill, and he would say, "Listen, I don't have any money, but how about I give you one of my paintings. And he would take out of his pocket a painting he did of a $10 bill and use that to pay $10 worth of his meal. And so two people would be sitting at the tables next to him in these restaurants. One, the Secret Service who would arrest him, and the other, collectors who would then buy from the restaurant the $10 painting plus the receipt. And that's how they collected his art. It was a fascinating thing, though, mixing the art with the money like that. Because money's beautiful, too, because of all this symbolism.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
But people should look up. Like if you Google JSG Boggs, he has some really beautiful paintings of fake money. So, so obviously though, paper money has its problems and needs to evolve too. Like one of the problems we discussed is the Federal Reserve, this central authority, which doesn't really necessarily know what they're doing. Like the Federal Reserve does a lot of good, particularly in times like these where maybe banks need more trust behind them and or banks could collapse. But they also control the value of the dollar without your permission. Like they can either raise interest rates or they can print money. And by the way, can you define, what does it mean actually when they print money?
So I think it's time to introduce another category of money, which is that throughout history, money comes in two forms. There's token money, which is money that has some kind of a physical representation, like a metal coin or a paper bill. And then there's ledger money, which is money that's just balanced, that's recorded on the ledger of some kind of an authority. It could be a bank, a fintech, the government itself.
What does that mean? Like it means like when I transfer money from, let's say, Wells Fargo to Bank of America, on some ledger in Wells Fargo for my account, money's subtracted, and on Bank of America in some digital ledger in a computer, money's added, but no actual currency goes from one bank to the other.
That's right. And the vast majority of money in existence today is ledger money. Even like you can go on the Federal Reserve and look up the statistics. I think there's only something like $2 trillion in physical bills and notes out there, but over $20 trillion in dollars that are nothing more than really in modern times database entries at either commercial banks like Bank of America or the Fed itself. And this is true in every country, in every currency, in part because ledger money is a lot more convenient. If you think about like large transactions, you wouldn't want to buy your house by showing up with duffel bags full of cash. Although I was recently told that that's standard practice in Argentina because it's dollarized.
Yeah. There's a black market, a blue market, and the regular market in Argentina. And then there's the Bitcoin market to signify the different types of currency there.
Right. And then ledger money is more useful across long distances. Like you wouldn't want to ship money to another country if you're making an investment there. It's more useful for capital markets. Like imagine if every time you traded stocks, you'd have to pay in cash. And more recently, it's really a big part of the digital economy. Like one of the great innovations of rideshare services like Uber was that they integrated credit card payments into the app. So you no longer had to do this awkward thing that you and I remember, that you take a cab and it gets there and the cab driver is like, that'll be $18.50. And you're like, I only have a 50. Do you have change? And it's very cumbersome. So
Right.
there are many benefits to ledger money, but there's a couple of big downsides. And one of them is that you have to trust whoever is maintaining the ledger to do a good job of it. It's one of the reasons why banking and fintechs are highly regulated. Like you wouldn't want it to be like Bank of America accidentally deleted your balance and then your money's gone forever.
And this is really a software issue. Like how did they avoid, when they started doing this, how did they avoid like not having major software issues where people would just lose their bank accounts and the bank would have no record of it, so they wouldn't be able to confirm or deny?
One is you would have a record of it. So
Hopefully.
you
I
would
mean, I
go and
wouldn't.
deposit your money and then they would give you a receipt that says like you have this deposit here, and they give you statements monthly that attest to that.
Yeah.
But really like auditors, controllers, government regulators, there's a very, very complex apparatus whose job it is to make sure that these ledgers maintain integrity, which is not something that you need for token money. Like the $20 bill in your wallet is a $20 bill in your wallet. You could lose it, possibly, if you lose your wallet, but it's not like accidentally going to suddenly disappear, nor, importantly enough, can a corporation or a government just snap its finger and make that $20 bill go away or be worth, $1? And this is an interesting segue when we get into the world of cryptocurrencies, because a lot of people, when they think about something like Bitcoin, they focus on the supply. It's decentralized. There's only ever going to be 21 million of it. There's no central bank that can print more, etc. But I think just as importantly, there is the integrity that the whole complicated blockchain infrastructure provides, which is that while it is a kind of ledger money, right? The blockchain is a ledger, it's a database. It has unique properties of token money, one of which is that if you have a Bitcoin in your wallet address, nobody can deny you access to your Bitcoin in the way that banks routinely actually deny people access to their own money. And it's not going to just suddenly disappear because of a mistake or an accident.
So we're going to talk about crypto and Bitcoin and the next evolution of currency in part 2 of this question, the history of money. But let's just list up until Bitcoin, the state of money has evolved to being, paper money combined with 90% this sort of digital ledger money, like money just kind of stored in a database. And we didn't really answer the question of how does one print money? I guess the idea is the Federal Reserve
yes.
it just increases what's on the ledger, but I'm not sure why. But we'll talk about that in part 2.
Okay.
But what are the problems of this digital ledger money, which is most of the money we use and spend right now?
So it's two. One is the supply issue, which is that because it's trivially easy. The TLDR of it is that for the Federal Reserve to create new dollars, they just put in a number into a database. At least in the old days, you had to physically print more money to a certain extent, but now it's all done electronically. And then the other thing is this question of access, which is that with ledger money, you're trusting the preserver of the ledger, the bank, to always give you access. And there are many legal reasons where banks don't. In fact, there are many legal reasons where they're obligated to deny you access, right? If law enforcement goes to them and tells them to freeze your money. And then in the geopolitical sense, you have things like economic sanctions. So those are two of the big downsides or risks of ledger money as controlled by governments and corporations. And then when you get into the world of a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, there is, the supply goes up, but it goes up algorithmically on a preset schedule, and nobody can suddenly be like, oh, well, there's a pandemic going on, we need to print more Bitcoins. And then your access, my access, actually literally anybody else's access is guaranteed by the technology.
So those are the two main problems. I would say there's a few others, but so just to summarize, one is if suddenly the Federal Reserve quietly decided to just double the amount of money in the system, then the dollars in your pocket lose value, would be cut in half in value. Because unless the economy was itself doubled in innovation and productivity, there's no reason why there should be twice as many dollars in the system. And so that's what really causes inflation, which means the value of the dollars in your pocket go down. And you had no say over that. And then problem number two
is access.
If the government decides it doesn't like you, they could basically shut off access to your bank account. And that happens, by the way. So
yeah, I mean, if your bank decides that they don't like you, they could do that. Or they could deny you a bank account in the first place.
Right, which has been a major problem in some areas of society. So there's a variety of problems there. I would say there's additional problems. One is there's the possibility of human error. Like we discussed, what if your bank just loses track of your money somehow? There's a software bug or there's a criminal or whatever. Another is there's fees in the system because I have to use a bank. And by the way, some people don't have enough money to put money into a bank, and so they have their own issues. But because I have to use a bank, I have to pay fees. And let's say I was going to wire you money. I got to go through my bank, then the local reserve bank, then the Federal Reserve, then your local reserve, and so on. There's fees along the way. So I think you, Omid, were the one who told me, how much fees are baked into the financial system worldwide?
I think total, the revenues of the world's payment providers is somewhere in the vicinity of $3 trillion a year.
$3 trillion.
And that's the fees. That's not, it's either fees. So you send the wire, they charge you a fee. You use a credit card, the store has to pay a fee. But also, if you think about like forfeited interest, like if you have money in a checking account at a big bank right now, they're not going to pay you interest on it. That 5% interest that you could be earning now goes to them. So cumulatively, you can think of it as a tax on the entire economy.
Right. And with crypto, because you're avoiding all of these systems that was kind of glued together in a hodgepodge sort of way, crypto solves all these problems. Furthermore, and this is the kind of the topic of your book, re-architecting trust. You don't have to trust your bank with crypto. Like your bank could go out of business, but you still have immediate access to your money. It's just, in a sense, you bank yourself.
That's right.
And there's a lot of, we've seen this. Like for the first, Satoshi invented Bitcoin in around 2009, or he released it in 2009, and that was right after the financial crisis, where people were worried every bank was going out of business. Fast forward 14 years, suddenly everybody's worried once again. Every bank. Was actually the dream come true for Satoshi in 2009. Banks have actually gone out of business now again, and Bitcoin shoots up as a result, because this is the problem it was meant to solve, and it actually does solve it.
If you look at survey data in the US, when they ask them about what kind of institutions people trust, a lot of times the least trusted institutions are government and then banks and Wall Street. And one way to think about the existing fiat money system is that it is a system that is controlled by the governments and banks. When you move into the crypto domain, it is a system that's actually mostly controlled by no one, but to the extent that there are any decisions that have to be made, they are made by the community. And that's why there are certain people who are actually very passionate about this being a new paradigm about how we create money and then preserve its integrity.
And so in part two, we're going to cover a lot of this. Plus, we'll cover what happens when there's central bank digital currencies, because that brings up some of the old problems again in a scary way, maybe even worse, even though it has a crypto sort of feel to it. So money could evolve. We could see money evolve even further. But in the meantime, this is part one, the history of money. If you have any questions about what we discussed here, just tweet out at me at @Altucher, or tweet out at Omid, Malekan Ohms, MALEKANOMS, and we'll answer again on this podcast. But History of Money Part 2, written by Mel Brooks. I feel like that's what is it? History of Money Part 2 will be in a couple weeks after this one, so you have time to ask questions, and that's going to cover kind of all the new evolutions in money and what even might be coming down in the future. So, Omid, thanks so much for your expertise. It was so fascinating. I didn't really know a lot of these things. And that's the History of Money Part 1.
Thanks, James.
Is it possible to predict the unpredictable? Could surgeons use a patient's own anatomy to create 3D printed life-size organ models to map out challenges ahead of time, making surgery more precise, efficient, and less invasive? Is it possible? It already is, because every day we're doing what's never been done. Learn more at mayoclinic.org/possible. Mayo Clinic. You know where to go.
Did you know that franchise owners are more likely to start a successful business than entrepreneurs who go it alone? Neighborly offers 19 premier brands with services that repair, maintain, and enhance homes. With Neighborly, you'll get the business model, marketing resources, and corporate support you need to pursue a rewarding future. Learn more about joining over 5,000 Neighborly franchises by downloading your free guide at go.nbly.com/podcast.